For Edpuzzle 3, we are going to be going over specifically how to complete your assignment 3, which is annotating a bibliography. And so this is going to be putting together the two skills that you developed in assignments 1 and 2. It combines one, generating an APA-style reference, with your skills from assignment 2, which is paraphrasing. And I know some of you, if you were not familiar with paraphrasing before and really got your first practice and experience doing it in assignment 2, might not be the most comfortable with it yet, but that's the point of us practicing it in these scaffolded assignments. And you have an extra tool with this assignment through using Turnitin for your own benefit to help gauge your own paraphrasing and check yourself. So there's no need to be nervous or anxious if you're not real comfortable with paraphrasing yet. That's the whole idea, is that we have to practice it until we become more comfortable with it, when we really have to start doing it rigorously in the method sequence and other upper level psychology courses. So in this Edpuzzle, first of all, I'm just going to break down what article you should be using for this assignment. And so last week we found some articles in the library. You found 3 and submitted them. Not all of them are going to work great for this assignment, and so I'll tell you exactly which one to use. I'll also show you the 2 pages in the module that you need to be using in addition to this Edpuzzle to complete this assignment. Then we'll just generally go over what an annotated bibliography is, how to get through reading the article that you'll be annotating and summarizing, and then actually producing the annotated bibliography and submitting it through Turnitin. And finally, we'll take a look at the grading rubric before we finish this Edpuzzle up today. So what articles should you use? The reason I have you select 3 empirical articles in assignment 2 is that oftentimes some of the articles that you find are not going to be well suited for this assignment. And so the idea is that I will select 1 out of the 3 that you did, and I'll select the one that will be the easiest for you to summarize and annotate. So say, for instance, of the 3 articles that you submitted, only 1 of them was actually empirical. If it's not empirical, it's not going to fit in with this assignment and the rubric and the instructions, and so if it's not, you won't be able to use it. But on the other hand, say you did find 3 empirical articles and submitted them all. Some of those articles might be very, very long. Say you have one article that's 60 pages. That's going to be a heavy workload for you to read through, understand, and then summarize in your own words. And so I'll opt for the article that's a little bit shorter and recommend that one to you. You might also have found an article that sounds really interesting, but it might be really, really complex and hard to understand. Say an article using neuroimaging or fMRI or something else like that that has a really jargon-heavy vocabulary that's going to be hard for you to really comprehend and pull meaning from. So essentially, I'm going to go through all your articles, and I'm going to pick the easiest one for you to use for this assignment. And then in your feedback on that assignment, I will tell you which article to use. So it's very important to view that feedback before you begin working on assignment 3. If you need to revise assignment 2 and you weren't able to find any empirical articles, or you didn't find any that I think were appropriate for this assignment, what I will do is I will find an article on that topic that you searched for that will work for this assignment, and I will give that to you. So either way, whether it's one of the articles you selected or one that I found for you, you'll be set up with an article that will work well with this assignment and won't make your life too difficult. Although we will talk about how all of these empirical articles are relatively complex and not easy reading. So in the module this week, there are 2 pages that you need to use that essentially have the instructions for this assignment. They have more detail than what I'm going to give you here because you'll be able to print those out and use them as you go along. And so what is an annotated bibliography module page and the completing your annotated bib module page both have very explicit instructions on how to go about doing this assignment. So if you can print them out, that's ideal. But you need to reference those throughout the entire time. You will also see that there is an example provided in the module. I provide you with that so that you can see what I mean by a coherent summary and generally what the formatting, what your assignment should end up looking like. And so that is there as a tool for you to use as well. So what is an annotated bibliography? You might have done one for another class, perhaps for a class in a totally different field like literature or history. But generally an annotated bibliography in this case is a reference, since those are the types of bibliographies that we use. It's an APA style reference followed by a summary of the content in that reference. The idea is when you get further along in the psychology program or in your psychology career, you're going to be reading a lot of empirical articles. You know, for your research methods course, you're going to be reading 6 or more. And then if you go to graduate school, you're going to be doing papers that have 10 or 15 or 20 articles. And so one of the things you need to be able to do is to read through those articles and generate summaries for yourself so that you can go back and read these, you know, 2-paragraph summaries of these articles and get the general gist and remind yourself of what happened, so that instead of going back and revisiting and having to reread the entire article. So they essentially are like cliff notes of research studies that are written into a coherent summary, like a story that will make sense when you go back and read it several months later. And so the end product is a coherent summary. It's not going to end up being cliff notes. It needs to make sense without having read the article. And so I should be able to read your summary and understand what happened in that study. It shouldn't be fragmented notes that don't make sense because I wasn't there and I didn't read it. It should have like a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like a story. So these researchers wanted to do this. They asked participants to do this. What they found was this, and we concluded this. And so it kind of goes in order, and the content pages in the module will lay it out exactly what order you need to summarize information in and what you need to include. So don't worry about that. But it needs to make sense together. And so one good way to check that is to have someone else read it after you're done. You know what happened in the article because you're going to have read the entire thing and probably reread multiple parts of it, but they don't. So the idea is that you want me or someone else or you in 2 months to be able to understand the summary and what happened in that study without having read the article itself. So the first step for this whole process is reading the actual empirical article, and that's a skill all on its own. Unlike the summary that you're writing and the paraphrasing that you're working on, which everyone, a lay audience, which means in our context, non-psychologists or non-psychology experts, that they should be able to understand. These research studies are basically written for psychology experts or other researchers in the field or students. And so they are not supposed to be written for your mother to understand. And as a result of that, they are a little complex. The good news is that empirical articles all contain the same sections and they all follow a standardized order and organization per APA style. And so it makes it really easy to go through and find certain information within the article because it's all in the same order and it's all organized by headings. And so we'll see that in just a few minutes. But even though we'll be able to easily find where all the information should be, finding the information within that section can take some practice because these articles are complex. They're written about psychological research studies. They often have a lot of jargon or terminology that you may not be familiar with. And sometimes the researcher or the psychologist that's writing it might be writing in a convoluted way or something that's more complex than it needs to be. Sometimes, and you'll see this is one of your jobs paraphrasing, they're not saying it as simply as they can. And so that's one of your jobs when paraphrasing is to try to spit it out in a way that everyone else could understand and getting rid of the extra words and making it a little bit easier to understand. But the first part of that process is going through and understanding what they're saying first. And so this takes some practice. Luckily, you don't have to understand every single line of a research article. We'll see in a second that there are some parts that you can skim through and some parts you really need to make sure you understand and reread. So the first step or sub-skill that we have to conquer when it comes to these articles is learning where to find certain information. And so that becomes really easy when you understand the general APA style layout for an empirical article. Also, all the notes and the summary and the content that I require you to have is in the order that it's presented in the article, so that makes it easy as well. But I'll show you on some actual articles in a second how you can use the headings within them to navigate and find certain information. But you need to know where stuff is, and you need to know what parts you really have to understand. So there's a lot of information in these articles, but some parts you really need to make sure that you completely comprehend, pull meaning from, because those are the parts that you will need to be paraphrasing. So understanding, being able to find and understanding the research questions. So what that study looked at, what it compared, or what it wanted to do. That's a really important part to make sure you really understand. And so certain parts that explain the purpose or the research questions, you'll need to, if they're hard for you to understand, you'll just have to reread those sections until you get it. But there are other parts that you can skim over, and mostly that part is just the results part. The results, as you'll see in a second, are littered with statistical number strings and statistical analysis and this and that, and only within all those statistics, you'll find one line that says the actual results. And so the results section, you can really just skim through because you're not expected to understand the statistics or pull meaning from them, okay? Really, read through all the numbers, skim through them, and then just find the one line of text that say what those numbers actually mean. And so the results section, if it's really long or really complex, you don't have to worry too much about that. Because the discussion section, which comes after the results section, will actually summarize, in most cases, the results for you also. And so you don't need to be daunted by the results section. That's something that you don't need to worry too much about because we can find the information either in the discussion or we can find the actual text within the numbers and the results. So what are the sections of an empirical article? Well, they all start with an introduction, which essentially just comes right after the abstract. In the introduction, they're going to briefly introduce the topic and the background of the topic, the previous research that's been done on it. So say you're reading a study that's comparing diagnosing criteria for boys or for male and female children with autism, okay? They'll give you kind of the background, all that on that, and everything that we know about that up until then. Then after the background, they will tell you at the end of the introduction section what their study is specifically looking at. So we know all this, and now our study is going to investigate X and Y. And so the research questions and the purpose of the study always come towards the end of the introduction. The introduction can be, depending on the article, anywhere from 2 pages to 20 pages long. You don't have to understand, for the sake of these annotated bibliographies, because you're only writing a 2-paragraph or 3-paragraph summary, all of the previous research in the background. So you don't have to understand all of those 20 pages and summarize that. What you have to do is you have to just generally get the gist of what we know about the previous research and then make sure that you highlight what this study is doing with their research questions and purpose of the study. The next section that will come after that is the method. So they've told you in the introduction what their study is doing and why. And then the method section is telling you how they're doing it. So they will very explicitly describe who the participants were, what their traits were, gender, age, demographic, any special attributes they have. And then after that, they'll tell you the measures, or rather kind of the ingredients that they used in this, what types of equipment or materials or tasks or assessments that they gave to the participants. And then they will describe the procedure, which is kind of like the step-by-step to-do list in a recipe. So it's exactly what they did and how and what order to accomplish the experiment. And so you'll see all of these sections will have headings within the article. Then the results section, those are usually accompanied with figures and graphs and charts and tables. And then again, a lot of statistical strings and stuff that you don't need to worry too much about. And the last section is a discussion section. And so a discussion will generally at the beginning have a summary of results, just reiterating what they've found, and then they will discuss what they think those results mean, and what types of implications that we can pull from those results. So what can we now do with that kind of knowledge? And so for your annotated bibliography, you will have to pull basically the main gist out of the article for each of these things. Now, although APA style follows a certain format, and they're all going to have these general sections, depending on the journal that it's published in, some of them might have slightly different names, but it will be obvious what everything is, regardless of how they've tweaked. Like sometimes they will combine they will have a discussion section, and then they'll also have a conclusion section, or they will have a results and analysis section, or something like that. But it's still very easy to navigate your way around these articles using the headings that they provided. And so we can look at two separate articles now that I'll share with you so that we can get a general idea of how to navigate our way around this. So the first thing at the beginning of every article, you'll see that we have two articles here, and they look different. And that's because they're published in different journals, and they all have different formatting requirements. You'll see this article, one of my articles, looks very much different than this article right here, but they're all going to have the same sections within them. So I'll start with this article. You'll see that we have all the reference information here for when you're generating your reference. That's the journal information, the year, the title, all the authors. The first thing for most journal articles that you'll see is the abstract. And so essentially you are writing something similar to an abstract, except it needs to be in your own words, and certainly you don't want to copy their abstract or use anything from it, but it's going to be somewhat similar. After the title and the abstract, it goes straight into the introduction. So you'll see that the text starts. This is a very short article, just for example's sake. And so this introduction probably only has 2 paragraphs. It's probably a 1 in 1,000 chance that the article you found or that I gave you will have a 2-paragraph introduction. But the text that immediately follows the title and the abstract is the introduction. After the introduction, you'll see that we have all these headings here. And so it's really obvious where all the sections are. So this is obvious, the method section. They just give a brief overview. This is where I was saying that sometimes they're slightly different. You see they use the word subjects here instead of participants. That should be really obvious that those are the same things. So they describe all the participants here. So in the introduction, remember the important things that you need for your annotated bibliography are what? You need to know the general background, which they describe here, and then you need to know their research questions, which essentially is, or the purpose, which is right here. And so those are usually going to be almost always at the end of the introduction. And so if you're having a hard time finding it, you can just kind of scroll to the end of the introduction, a couple paragraphs right before the method section, and read through it, and you'll find it. So they have just the overview, they have the subjects here. Here are the materials that they used, the procedure. So again, these sections are all very, very obvious. Then we have the results section here. Again, these are the number strings and the statistics that I'm talking about that you don't need to worry too much about. Rather, you want to read kind of around the numbers in the results section and find where it says the verbal interpretations of what those numbers actually mean. So here, right here, you see this one seemed to compare a control group who viewed the photographs without the facial features, and they found no effect. And so that's an important part there that you would be able to kind of sort through and pick up. But again, if you have a hard time finding any of the actual results that answer the research question, the results question section rather, they will always summarize and reiterate them at the beginning of the discussion section, which again is very obvious here. Discussion sections are usually pretty long, and so you don't need to summarize everything that it says in it. The important parts of your annotated bibliography that are in the discussion section are going to be the results, if you weren't able to get them from the results section, in the conclusions and implications. And so the conclusions and implications are usually going to be towards the end of the discussion section. So here the implications are usually kind of explicitly cued and pointed out. So we can see here they're getting ready to say the implications. Again, implications are, what is this information or this knowledge that we gained from the study useful for? What can we use the results of the study for? Why is it important? And then you'll see up here, they've just generally summarized some conclusions. So this is one article. Again, they're all going to look a little different. So like this article that I published out of the Journal of General Psychology looks much different just because the journal has different formatting requirements when it gets printed out. So again, it starts with the title and the abstract, and then immediately after the title and the abstract, the introduction starts. And so the length of this introduction is probably closer to what you're going to be finding in your articles. So again, the introduction just starts by generally explaining the topic. It goes on to talk about the previous research and what we know about that topic. And then towards the end of the introduction is where you're going to find the purpose of this study that we were running and the research questions. So I'm scrolling to the end of the introduction section, which I can find the end of the introduction section because right after it comes the method. And so here is the end of the introduction section because I can tell because the method is right here. And so let's see, we have as a second aim, so that would be one of the purposes of the study. And so obviously the first aim is going to be described right up here. Sometimes they will explicitly talk about, you know, research question 1 or research question 2, or sometimes they will just kind of describe them within the context of the sentence and the paragraph. But either way, these last 3 paragraphs, you'll see here in the current study, our aim was to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The last few paragraphs of the introduction are going to have that information that you need for your annotated bibliography. So again, we're seeing the same sections, the method section with participants, materials, the procedure, all of this is very easy to find. The important part is to kind of, since your summary is only going to be 2 paragraphs, is to find the important parts out of these sections to include in your summary. And so you don't want to tell us everything about the participants, although the participants description here is relatively short. You don't want to tell us everything about the materials because obviously your summary is going to end up being, you know, 10 pages long at that point. You just want to give us the general gist. So participants were undergraduate, college students, typical undergraduate age. These were actually both male and female. The materials, we used 20 word lists that were either semantically or phonologically related. Some rhymed and some were related thematically. That's pretty much it. The procedure, we had some of the people imagine the words in the word list, and we had some people not imagine words in the word list. By the way, they all studied the word list, and they recalled all the words on a test later. So you can see how I'm kind of just condensing down all of this into a shorter summary that will fit into, you know, your 2-paragraph annotation. So some of the things you don't need to know or include are, you know, that participants used a Mac or a Dell computer, or that participants used a 2-point pencil to fill out the questionnaire, or that the text on the PowerPoint they were presented with was 72 black Calibri font, right? Just need to know the main gist of what they did, what they used, and who they were. Here, the results section, you'll see that there's headings within the results section, and that's pretty common if there's a lot of results and different types of analysis that this study did. They'll organize that under more and more headings. And so again, this is kind of stuff that you could just skim through. And then if you want, you can look for, I lost myself here. You can look for like results within all the number strings and stuff, but most often I think the easiest bet for you to find the results in a way that's easy for you to understand is to, again, go to the beginning of the discussion. So you'll see here, we essentially summarize all the results that we gave the statistics and everything for above. So again, the discussion section is easily identified. Here at the beginning, we have a summary of the results. Then this is all talking about what we think those results mean and how they relate to previous research. And then again, at the end, we have conclusions and then implications for what those conclusions mean, which you can usually always find at the end of the discussion or the conclusion section, whatever they call it in that specific study. And so they're all going to look a little bit different, but you should be able to find the main sections, and the information within those main sections is usually where I just pointed out where it would be in this Edpuzzle. So how should you go about annotating your bibliography? There is no one way to do it, but I've just provided some recommended steps here that I think would be the easiest way for you to start doing this if you're not familiar with it. So the first step would be to print out or write down the information that you need to include in your summary. And so on that page, the module pages, what is an annotated bibliography? That has all the information that you need to include in your summary, including you know, the research questions and what that is, the participants and what information there is important, et cetera, et cetera. And so you want to have that all on hand as you are reading through the article, so you know what information to pay attention to as you are reading. Again, some of these articles are 5 or 10 or 20 pages long, and so you need to be able to be on the lookout for the information that's important and you need to paraphrase and include in your summary. So you have all that. Whenever you are reading through your article, we'll start beginning to end. Whenever you hit information, so say it says our research question was, you know, X, Y, and Z. Said, oh, that research question is important. I know I need it in my summary. You want to sit there and reread that information until you really understand it, okay? Again, these articles can be complex, and so it would be take a really good writer or researcher to write something so clear that you, who is probably relatively unfamiliar with the topic, would understand it very easily the first read through. So when you hit something that's important and goes in the summary, keep rereading it. Then as you read through the article, you want to start in the beginning and read through it in order, of course. You want to take notes. And you want to take notes in your own words, with the exception of key psychological phrases that don't need to be paraphrased, like autism spectrum disorder or cognitive behavioral therapy, or something like that, that we don't have to paraphrase. So you want to take notes on the important sections that are going in your summary as you read through it. The reason that you want to take notes in your own words is it's going to reduce the likelihood that you accidentally plagiarize later on. So if you write down the sentence verbatim on the research question in your notes, you're going to be more likely to include that sentence verbatim or almost verbatim in your summary, which is going to end up with a not paraphrased sentence. And so even as you're taking notes, you want to try to put things in your own words. So we're reading through the article, looking for all the important parts, taking notes in our own words. Remember that you can skim through the results, looking for the main findings or comparisons and skipping the statistics. If you have a really hard time with that, again, you can just skim through the results and try to go find those in the beginning of the discussion. After you've read through the whole thing, you've taken notes on the information that you need or highlighted it or done however best fits you. Then you want to start writing a summary, including all of the information that's outlined in the module that needs to go in the summary. And so you want to explain all the important parts, which again, I highlighted in the module, what the important parts are, in your own words. Afterwards, what you need to do and what's really important is to check and make sure everything flows together coherently. So after you're done finishing writing your summary, you've included all the parts that I stipulated in the module pages. You need to read through it and make sure that that makes sense together. Sometimes we will put this information together. We're looking for certain stuff, the research question, the participants, and we'll put these sentences together, but they don't really make sense together because you didn't write it as a whole. You wrote it sentence by sentence. So you need to go through and make sure that this reads as a coherent summary and story. And if you're missing something, if something doesn't line up or something doesn't make sense or you brought up something before that you didn't answer later, you need to go back and revisit the article and fix that. So, for example, this happens quite often. If you say in the beginning, their research question, their study aimed to compare female elementary school kids and male elementary school kids to see if the same diagnostic criteria could be used to identify autism. Then later on, when you're describing the results, you need to let us know and answer that question that you outlined earlier, whether their results indicated that the same diagnostic criteria could be used. Is it effective on both male and female elementary school students? Sometimes we'll describe something and then not get to it later on because there's so much information that we're sorting through. So you need to make sure that it all lines up and makes sense together. And again, having someone else read your summary for you and point out places that don't quite make sense or line up is a good way to do that. So I told you that we are going to be using Turnitin as a tool for you. So I'll be using it, sure. I'm going to look and make sure that everything's paraphrased. But before I look at it, you're going to be using Turnitin to make sure that all of your work is paraphrased. It's really hard to tell after you've been reading and rereading the same article over and over again and then writing the summary how well something that you wrote is paraphrased. And so you'll be able to use Turnitin. I have it turned on so that you can access all of your Turnitin information. And so you can view it before the deadline and change anything that needs to be changed before the deadline. So what you want to do is you want to turn in your assignment at least 1 to 2 hours before the deadline. Otherwise, if any changes need to be made, you're not going to have time to do it before the deadline's up. So don't wait until the very last second. After you turn it in, wait a few minutes and then go to your similarity report. So after you turn it in, it's automatically going to generate an originality report with a similarity rating. It takes a couple minutes. Right after you submit it, it's not going to pop up, but if you refresh your page or go back to the page 3 or 5 or 10 minutes later, you'll see next to your assignment submission a little bar that says your originality report and your similarity rating. And you can click on that bar and get lots more information about it. And so initially when you go back to look at it, it's going to give you that bar and it's going to tell you what % of your assignment is similar. And so your assignment can be up to 25% similar, which usually is like the bar will be green and it'll tell you 25% or 23 or 18 or 5. If it's any more than that, say it says it's 40% similar, the bar is going to be orange. You can click on the bar and go look at your similarity report. And what it will do is it'll show you your assignment, and highlighted, it will have the sections of your assignment that are similar, that are the same words and structure as other sources. So it'll highlight the information that's not paraphrased, and then you can go back and re-paraphrase that information, revise and correct it, and then resubmit your assignment. And so it's okay if you submit your assignment multiple times. I'm going to look at the most recent submission before the deadline, okay? Now, regardless of how well you paraphrased something, some stuff is going to turn up as similar. And one of those things is the reference that is at the top of your annotated bibliography. That's always going to be highlighted as similar. That reference is used in that exact style in lots of other articles in the reference section. And so that's always going to be similar, and that's totally fine, okay? You can expect that. That's one of the reasons why we allow you to have up to a 25% similarity rating, because that reference is going to be, it's going to count for like 10%. You'll also see that some terms might be highlighted. So autism spectrum disorder might be highlighted, or cognitive behavioral therapy might be highlighted, because those terms are used in a lot of other sources and a lot of other articles. And that's okay if a term is highlighted. What is not okay is if a sentence or a sentence fragment or the large majority of a sentence is highlighted. That indicates poor paraphrasing. If the majority of a sentence is highlighted except for a few synonyms that you switched around, that is not paraphrasing and it needs to be fixed. And so you'll be able to go and look at your report, and if your score is too high, you'll be able to see exactly what is highlighted, and then you can fix that before you turn it in. So this is a way for you to check yourself as you're getting comfortable in practicing this paraphrasing process. So briefly, just before we end, we will look at the grading rubric here. And so you'll see these are the points possible, like any other assignment. This is worth 20 points. The reference and the formatting for the reference that goes at the top of the annotation is 4 points. So that's easy. You guys have already done that on 2 assignments so far and received feedback, perhaps 3 assignments if you did a revision for assignment 1. So that's 4 easy points right there. You should know easily how to do that. Then we have all the content in your actual annotation. And so this is all the stuff that's laid out in the module pages, talking about what information you need to include in your summary. We have just the basic formatting and instructions here, so how it's supposed to look, deadline, turning it in. And then here, points will be deducted if you are past the originality score and there's unparaphrased portions. And so you don't get points for paraphrasing, but you get points taken off for not paraphrasing. Now, just some notes down here to keep in mind as you're going. We're all practicing this. A lot of us are learning to do this for the first time. I don't expect for you to be great at this. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you just totally bomb it and get confused and overwhelmed, like any other assignments, if you fail it, I'll go ahead and give you some more feedback and I'll work with you, and then I'll invite you to revise and resubmit the assignment for a higher grade. So no big deal. What your assignment does have to be is sufficiently paraphrased. Since you are able to check your own paraphrasing and report through Turnitin, there's no ambiguity. There's no reason that you shouldn't be able to see what is paraphrased and what is not, and then fix what isn't paraphrased. And so that is an absolute expectation, as is at least trying to make sure you get all the important part of information from the article. And again, that's something we're practicing. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And we can always try to fix it and submit another one if it doesn't go all that well. And so you can use this Edpuzzle in conjunction with the module pages. Make sure to look at your assignment 2 feedback so that you know what article to use, and let me know any questions you have as you're going through the process for assignment 3.